Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. The long and winding road that has been the Canada Disability Benefit made a few more pit stops last week. The federal budget showed off some framework of what the benefit may look like. Under the current proposal, eligible Canadians would receive a maximum of $200 a month. Michael Prince is a professor of social policy at the University of Victoria. He also served as a member of the Federal Advisory Committee. Professor Prince, thank you so much for making the time to pop on the show today. I'm grateful.
My pleasure, Dave. Thank you.
So you ended up resigning after the budget was released last week. Why did you feel it was time to resign from the committee?
Well, when the budget came out on last Tuesday, Dave, I was quite disappointed, quite shocked, in fact, when I first read the amount, which you just said, $200 a month, $2,400 maximum for a year. I actually thought maybe it was a printing error, a typographical error, that they really meant to say $24,000. And then, but as I read it, I saw it was too low of an amount, and it was not going to be provided till at least next July 2025, and it was only going to cover at best 500,000 or 600,000 eligible Canadians, leaving out probably up to 1 million more other Canadians with disabilities living in poverty. So I slept on it over the Wednesday, and by Thursday I came to the conclusion that if I didn't speak out and if I didn't step down from the advisory group, people might interpret that I supported this, and I thought this was acceptable and appropriate. And I just really struggled with it, Dave, and so I thought I had to resign. And then I decided to make it public so people would know that I was stepping away and what the reason was. Otherwise, I would have probably just quietly disappeared off the group, and people would never really have appreciated the depth of my disappointment. And I think you share that, and I think pretty well all the disability groups across the country were a real sense of letdown last week about this announcement.
The number itself is shockingly low, shockingly low. No matter what the number would have been, there probably would have been some reaction and criticism. Yep. But $200 is just such a pittance when they're talking about poverty alleviation. And then in terms of some of the structured breakdown, which was, oh, that's a maximum you're going to receive. There's going to be a scale here. Again, there's some merit to the notion of a scale, but when the number is so low, I mean, I don't understand what kind of reaction the government was anticipating here.
Well, I think a lot of people are scratching their heads, Dave, trying to figure out, you know, how did we get to here? Because you'll know back in September 2020, the government put in a speech from the throne, a commitment to introducing a Canada Disability Benefit. And in that throne speech, they said it would be modeled along the lines of the Guaranteed Income Supplement Program, which is a well-known, long-established income support program for low-income seniors in Canada. And that program, the GIS, has made a real serious contribution to reducing poverty among older Canadians. And so, you know, the GIS pays anywhere from around between $800 a month to around $1,000 a month. And so you're right, $200 a month fell well short of that. When the legislation was finally passed to set up this benefit last summer, you'll recall it was amended. There were some good amendments made to the bill that was accepted by both the Senate and the House of Commons. The law was passed unanimously by all the political parties. And in that, it said that the benefit, when it was determined, should take into account, first of all, the official poverty line of Canada and a recognition that many Canadians with disabilities do live in deep poverty. And it also said that the benefit should also, in addition to the poverty line, recognize that there are additional costs of living associated with having a disability, and also to take note of the Canadian commitments under the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So none of that seems to have been taken into account last week in the budget. So you just have to wonder how the hell they picked $200 a month. And I think part of it was perhaps it was not last fall, perhaps not intended to be included in this budget, that they were going to wait until they developed the regulations, and then maybe we would have heard something this fall or maybe in the next federal budget in 2025. So this has no connection really to the legislative commitments that are in the law, and really no real connection to the expectations or the genuine needs, as you well know, of so many people across the country.
Michael, I know there may be only so much you can say about this, but in terms of the recommendations the board was giving to the federal government, what were some of the key takeaways that you wanted them to consider? I know you just laid out a couple of them right there, but I think it's worth taking a deeper gander at what the board would have preferred in regards to a structure around the benefit.
Well, I think one of the things that really stunned me, and again, disability groups made this loud and clear, Dave, before the budget came out, was do not rely on the disability tax credit, federal tax measure, as the primary eligibility gateway or screen to become qualified for this new Canada disability benefit. You know, if you are, please complement that or supplement it with other eligibility criteria, even at the federal level, where we have the Veterans Disability Benefits programs, we have the Canada Pension Plan Disability Program, there's other the student loan programs for students with permanent disabilities. There's 3 or 4 other eligibility criteria that are slightly better or a little more open and would have widened the coverage of the benefit and not put up additional barriers, which we know already exist with the DTC program. So that was disappointing. More broadly, I think a lot of groups were saying, if people are already qualified for and receiving provincial social assistance on the grounds of having a disability, those should be automatically enrolled and eligible into the federal program. Like, work out a federal-provincial agreement that streamlines the eligibility and eases the access to the benefit. There's no real discussion of that. So presumably officials have been working on this for the last 2 years or longer, and they've known what the views are and the recommendations have been of a whole host of disability groups and other social policy groups and anti-poverty groups across the country. What was announced in the budget last Tuesday is one of our worst nightmares, is relying exclusively on the disability tax credit. The budget does acknowledge that they're going to put some additional money in to help facilitate people applying for the DTC and supporting health professionals to do so. But that's really just saying we're working with this really limited, flawed program's eligibility rules. We're going to try to make it a little less worse than it is now. And again, this in a way contravenes the Accessible Canada Act that was passed 5 years ago about do not throw up any new barriers or obstacles to people with disabilities, remove them. And relying exclusively on the DTC presents continued barriers and obstacles to eligibility. So again, there's so many things that are of concern around this announcement, Dave, but those are a couple of other real key ones that's going to really limit the ability. And as you said, it's at maximum a $200 a month. You have to wonder, and I don't think the government's provided any estimates on this yet, but you have to wonder what the average amount will be. If 200 is the maximum, the average is going to be, you know, $100, $110 a month. So it's not even going to be anywhere near what the government's touting to be, you know, a good first step in addressing financial insecurity.
The disability tax credit is inelegant, and there have been a number of conversations on this show the last couple of months all about some lacking of transparency and ease of being eligible for the DTC, even if you do have a disability. Professor Prince, I'm so glad you mentioned the provincial side of this, especially knowing that provinces have their own databases in regards to people who have been deemed eligible of disability supports. Especially knowing that the next year or so is going to involve quite a bit of negotiating between the federal government and provinces to ensure this money doesn't even get clawed back when it hits the pockets of people with disabilities. I do find that coordination between the feds and the provinces on this was going to be paramount, and it kind of feels like the federal government wasn't really willing to grapple with the provinces on this. They picked an amount that just wouldn't get clawed back because the number was so low.
Right. I mean, there almost seems to be a real sense of, well, we know in general, the state of federal-provincial relations in this country right now is rather rocky and stormy. The premiers the other day just held a press conference criticizing the Trudeau government, that the federal government is overreaching its jurisdictions and involving itself in responsibilities that belong to the provinces under the Constitution. A good example, I guess, is the federal government direct funding to the municipalities over housing construction. Now that's, I think probably a lot of Canadians probably support that, but the premiers are pushing back. And so there's some obvious tension. There always is in a federation like Canada. There's going to be some pushing and pulling and a little bit of tension and rubbing between the two governments over issues. But on this one, there's been a history of good collaboration. And for example, when the registered disability savings plan was first brought out, the RDSPs several years ago, again, there was that same concern, Dave, about would the provinces offset or claw back the benefits that people would be if they established an RDSP and started to accumulate savings and assets within that. How would that impact their social assistance benefits? Well, all the provinces, all 10 of them, exempt RDSPs. There's no clawbacks on RDSPs in social assistance systems across the country. This could have been worked out as well. I know the provinces and the federal government have been meeting to discuss the anticipated Canada disability benefit. But now that it's out, now the provinces have a slightly better idea than I think they did a week or so ago as to what the program was going to look like. And in my own province of British Columbia, the minister responsible for disability benefits has said, you know, this has been helpful. We're seriously disappointed in how low the amount is, and it's not really going to make a real dent in helping to reduce poverty among Canadians with disabilities that we support. But she's at least said this now gives us some better inkling, and she sent out an assurance, that a signal that you know, there'll be no clawback here in BC, but there's still a lot of details to be worked out. And let's just hope that, given the groundswell of criticism that this has received, I think the Liberal government in Ottawa is quite frankly stunned with the universal condemnation and criticism of this announcement. I mean, government expected to be thanked, expected to be a pat in the back at least, or at least saying, well, it's not enough, but it's a good start, and thank you for getting it going. And they're not even getting that. They're getting a groundswell of criticism from all sorts of organizations within the disability community. And I'm happy to report other allies and other social movements and other leaders and communities are just saying this is woefully inadequate.
Even NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has said that this may actually be a hurdle on whether or not that party will support the budget to get it passed through Parliament. So that's certainly a factor. The NDP leader Singh has certainly expressed his dismay at the dollar amount, because they've been at the table as well doing some of this negotiation and consulting. Professor Prince, you've been super generous with your time this morning. I want to ask you one more question, and this is perhaps a little bit more abstract. Consultation around disability and accessibility issues is sometimes a four-letter word, but there has been quite a bit of consultation around the Canada Disability Benefit. But ultimately, looking at what came into focus last week, does it feel like perhaps that consultation was not as meaningful as someone like you or myself may have wanted it to be?
Yeah, it's a sobering. And, you know, in the budget, some will find it insulting. They even talk about, well, we're developing this in the spirit of nothing without us, or nothing about us without us, as you know, a common slogan and aspiration of the disability movement in Canada. And with this announcement, the government has said, we've got this little envelope of money that we've now announced, and you're still invited to be consulted, and we're happy to work with disability groups in designing this woefully inadequate, narrowly targeted, administratively complicated program. And so you're still welcome at the table, but what a terrible table to be invited to. So it really does add that additional sting of tokenism and a really boxed in opportunity, if I can call it that. No, I think there's a lot of head scratching, Dave, as to just how did we got to Tuesday. I'm talking with disability allies across the country. As you know, you forge ahead, you dust yourself off, and continue the good fight. Let's hope that this is a government that will hear the serious, sincere concern, not partisan. This is touching on people across the whole spectrum of society. So the consultations will continue with the regulations. There's a lot of details still to be worked out to make sure that this is not stigmatizing, that this can be as administratively straightforward and simple as possible, and that we work hard on looking at that benefit amount and the eligibility criteria, so that this really does reach out to everyone who ought to get this kind of much needed support.
Professor Prince, I've been following your work for a long, long time. So great to finally have a chance to chat with you this morning. Thank you for everything that you're doing.
Well, thank you, Dave. I really appreciate your show, and your voice on this is really important. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michael Prince is a professor of social policy at the University of Victoria. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.